couldn't be true of anything.
I-
It's hard to get a collective group to agree on anything generally, but that's what they at least attempt with awards. And if the audience shows up at the box office, I guess that's some sort of version of it as well.
And here we are live. We just got done our discussion of Academy Awards and award season in general, and I just made my case for Dune 84 that I know will fail miserably, but I love that movie. Getting to see it on the big screen was exciting. I will say I got to notice a few things I didn't before, like Patrick Stewart's character Gunny running into battle with a pug strapped to his chest. I love that. I love that. It was awesome. Just everything. I mean, freaking Baron Harkonnen.
What was the budget on eyebrow attachments in that film?
I'm not sure. But
there were an awful lot of out of control eyebrows in that film.
They should have got their own credit. They really should have.
Really?
They should have got their own credit. Brad Dourif's, I think, were the biggest. His probably should have won because he was like, whew. I mean, those were really, really out there. But I digress. I enjoy the movie. I understand the hate of it and how awful it might be, but even watching it this time, I still so had much fun with it. And I know I'm in the minority of minorities, and especially among the minority of my wonderful crew here tonight. But I'll just say the Dune 40th anniversary. Glad I got to see it on the big screen. Now, tonight, now that I stopped rambling, we are continuing our Solid Alibi month, folks, here in the spoiler room. So thank you for venturing down the stairs, pulling up a chair, and popping your favorite drink with us as we talk movie spoilers. And tonight we are going back to 1961, and we're looking at The Third Alibi. And I got a wonderful crew with me tonight to talk about The Third Alibi. First off, he's with us again. It is the one and only Mr. Jeff York. Hello, Jeff. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you doing?
Glad you're here. Thank you very much. We're doing all right. And then there's the man who keeps coming back for more. Hopefully we're getting into some better film territory for him. I'm hoping. It's none other than Mr. Ian Simmons. Hello, Ian.
Hey, this is the best one we've talked about in this entire series, I think. The Third Alibi. Wow.
Yeah, I liked it too.
And it's my first time watching it. Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. So, Jeff, if you wouldn't mind, could you give the synopsis of The Third Alibi?
Well, it's one of those very, very British films of, people sort of sitting and wearing suits all the time and, always, do you want some sherry, darling? Things like that. But there's some nastiness afloat underneath the surface of the still and elegant waters in this family. Lawrence Payne plays a character named Norman Martell, who is a Broadway composer working on a show behind in it. He's a little nervous, a little bit on edge, but not too on edge to have an affair with his wife's stepsister, who is named Peggy. His wife's name is what was her name? Helen. That's right, Helen. And she is played by a very fetching young actress named Patricia Denton, and then Jane Griffiths plays Peggy. It's kind of a three-hander up until the last act. But he's having an affair with her sister, and he loves her and is sort of talking about leaving her, as men always do when they have these affairs in films and stuff, but doesn't want to really rush it too much because he's working on his Broadway show. Peggy's pushing him, and then she finds out that she's pregnant, and suddenly that triggers them into sort of these very bad decisions, starting with Norman being very insensitive the way he approaches his wife Helen about it, basically telling her that she's boring as shit, and that can't I come in one night and you're not worried about talking about what we're eating or what we're blathering on about. It's like, oh, you want me to think about bigger topics? Okay, you just watch. And Peggy is sort of desperate to get him out of that marriage, so she conveniently tells him that she's pregnant, which we find out that indeed she is. So now there's a real reason for them to do it. But Helen is kind of a stubborn gal, and she says she's not going to give him the divorce. And do we mind going to the complications that ensue after that?
We'll dig into further, but yes.
Okay. Well, there's a number of clever twists, but the big crux of the movie, because it is a thriller, of course, is that Norman comes up with the very awful, almost Columbo-esque kind of motive to come up with this elaborate scheme that has so many holes in it. You'd think that there was the potholes in the winter on the 40 on the Lake Dan Ryan or whatever. Because it's a plot bound to fail, but he comes up with this idea to murder his wife. And of course, he drags Peggy into it. So it's just this terrible scheme that, of course, doesn't go quite as planned, but we'll talk more about that as we go into it. But it's a quick movie. It's like 104 minutes. I think it
Hour
is
and four.
excuse me, an hour and 4 minutes. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I meant. An hour and 4 minutes. Sorry. Yeah, that's really short. I mean, they used to do some Sherlock Holmes films back in the day that were 62 minutes, and yet it doesn't feel like anything's missing out of the story. In fact, it almost feels like the length of a Columbo episode. But in the third act, they bring in an intrepid sort of British detective who's able to put things together in sort of the fashion that is become the stalwart of such kinds of things. But it was made in 1961. It looks pretty good, and it's kind of a tidy little, smart little, twisty thriller with some bad acting, but some very good acting too. And I think, in particular, Patricia is very good as kind of the scorned woman, and I think that Lawrence Payne is particularly good too as the ever increasing fretting villain of the piece. Was that okay? How was that?
No, that was good. That was good. Thank you very much for that, sir. So, Ian, we're going to start with you, sir. Your high level thought. I know we spoiled it a little bit, but what was your initial reaction when you got done with this one?
My initial reaction was that I wanted to own it. I mean, it's great. It's weird because the main actor in the movie reminded me of a young Peter Mark Richmond, who played Mr. McCullough in Friday the 13th, Jason Takes Manhattan. Yeah, I had a crush on our lead actress too. The one, I guess, key bit of information I think you left out, Jeff, was she's been diagnosed with this
with a very bad heart condition. Yes, that's right.
And she doesn't want her husband to know. Partially, initially, it's because he's so stressed out, and it's kind of like a circular thing, and a Ouroboros of stress, where he's stressed out at work. That's kind of causing her to be on edge, and they're having these kind of relationship troubles. The breakup scene that you mentioned, my read on that was that he kind of charged in, insulting her, almost hoping like, well, if you feel that way, why don't we just get a divorce? Instead of having to like
baiting her.
Come clean, right? And it's so interesting because it's not. He doesn't come out and say, I want a divorce. He says, I want you to give me a divorce. Now, I don't know exactly how the divorce laws work over in the UK, or if they're even, practiced that way. It was just a very interesting way of looking at it. At one point, one of the characters says, we should just, it might have been Peggy, said, we should just go to America. Divorces are easy over there.
Easy over there.
Yeah. But,
the immoral Americans, they'll get divorced at the drop of a hat. If you burn the meatloaf, they'll be divorced by Tuesday.
How
dare you?
Meatloaf is sacred. But no, the thing I loved about this movie is it's, for something that's just over an hour long, it is so intricate, not just with the character relationships, but with the way the plot unfolds. I mean, the whole alibi setup where Norman is going to kill his wife and make it look like someone else broke in and killed her with the help of Peggy. He discovers that he can use these reel-to-reel tapes that he's using to, I guess, record and refine the musical that he's working on. He could use that to record a fake phone call to the police, or not the police. I can't remember who exactly he's calling.
It was just the operator.
Elaborate.
Just the operator. Right. Have her have a awareness of it. That sounds like he's in a different place at the time that he's not with his wife about to kill her.
Yeah, and then Helen was going to go to the movies and cause a scene at the box office so that she would be seen, people would remember her, and then she'd show up the next day and go sit down and watch a movie, but then leave partway through it, not be noticed, so she could slip back in. And it's a great plot. Unfortunately, Peggy going over to visit Helen, or Helen going over to visit Peggy, overhears this whole scenario going down, and then enacts her own kind of plot to get revenge on the two of them. And then cosmically at the end, like, everybody gets screwed. And it's a tragedy, but it's the mechanics of it. I don't know why we don't see movies like this all the time. I know it does kind of have this, partially because of the runtime, this kind of TV episode detective mystery quality to it. But you're right, it doesn't feel short. It feels like a substantial feature film. And yeah, I don't know why more people don't talk about this, because it's really terrific.
Yeah, it is. Jeff, what caught you with this film?
Well, it's funny. We all think of, and again, sort of referring back to what we were talking about before we went on air, about great films and classic films and things that take time to be appreciated. And we tend to make them always these sort of big films that came out and were sort of landmarks maybe in their time or shortly after. But there was a lot of stuff like this that was done that's almost B movies, or the smaller kind of stuff that chugged along and did a very effective, smart job at it. It was very well done. I earlier compared it to the Sherlock Holmes movies that Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce did, but really after the first one or two that they did, which were kind of loyal to the books and in period, the films became shorter and updated to modern times to be able to sort of fight the Nazis or be more contemporary, accessible to movie audiences. But they clocked in at little over an hour too, a lot of those. And you can watch them for free on YouTube. Maybe we'll talk about those at some point. But those are marvelous little films of intricate plotting and really clever little entertainment pieces for actors to play and such. And they look good. They have a certain style and elegance to them. I mean, again, even then, I think the production values were pretty good, even though they were in limited sort of form and such. But yeah, I was very impressed by it. And in fact, it makes me want to look up some of these actors and see what else they did, as well as the director and some of the writers. I didn't get a chance to look them up entirely, but I know this was a fairly decent hit at the time when it came out. And there was these actors had long careers, or at least somewhat substantial careers afterwards, though I'd never heard of all of them. But yeah, I was very impressed by it. I thought it was going to be one of those kind of groaning things. And like, there's a certain amount of it where you have to put your mind, wrap your head around the fact that it is that sort of, oh, darling, sort of, people that talk like that in the 30s and 40s. And, does anybody want a drink? At one point, Norman asked everybody, including the two policemen in the room, if they want a drink, because he's the one getting all shaky, and none of them want a drink. But he says, "Well, I'll have one then," because somebody's going to have it if I bring it up. But outside of some of those things that just come with period pieces and dated films, I'm with Ian. I thought it was incredibly well plotted and clever and kind of mean and ruthless in its way, both maybe it's from all three characters. And that end shot, the last little thing that ties it back to the very first 10 minutes of that show, was, I thought, a small little stroke of genius. So yeah, it's everybody sort of gets a little bit of the you think it's bad now? Just wait.
It's got Hitchcockian influences. I mean, this
For
felt
sure.
like, I mean, we talk about
A little
the
bit like Dial M in a way, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. But we talk about the runtime.
Yeah.
This almost could be an Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode.
Right.
And nothing wrong with that. That's not slamming it. Those were great. I love when they had a resurgence in the 80s, when they brought back the anthology shows. You had Tales from the Dark Side, you had Tales from you had Alfred Hitchcock Presents. They did all those, like the Hitchhiker, all of those. Those were really great. They even brought back Outer Limits for a time, but I could easily see this story as a little extended Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode, because of the way it plays out. And
Mark, there's one other thing too to that point is it's kind of a bygone era for a number of reasons, not only for the sort of window dressing that I was talking about, which gives it that sort of artificial, but fun feel to it, where everybody's dressed to the nines and talking about terrible, terrible sins. But it does have that, and I said it earlier, that elaborate ruse of a episode of Columbo, where again it was always elegant, sort of Tony people who were had to kill their spouse or their business partner, and they're kind of rotten to begin with, but then they go to the extent of even plotting a murder, and it was always some thing that was a little too clever by half. They thought, oh, I'm going to make it look like I'm in this other city, or I didn't touch these paintings, or things like that. I wasn't anywhere near an electric blanket to keep the body warm, so the time of death was fudged, things like that. It reminded me a lot of that. And what's interesting about it, and this is where you're serving your audience as well as the general population, Mark, a great service, and that is those kind of shows are coming back and appealing to a whole new audience. Since Columbo has appeared on Peacock, because it was an NBC show originally, it's found the audience of Gen Z. They've discovered it. It's something different for them. I mean, starting with the fact, and this is kind of the same way too, is we're told the murderer's plans. And in Columbo, the first act of any Columbo episode is we see the killer plotting his kill. And the shocking thing about that is not only does it eliminate the who done it, but it turns it into a how done it. But it also asks the audience, sort of like it does here, sort of like it does in a lot of the Hitchcock work, to unwittingly become accomplices, because we're hearing it too, and we sort of are invested in Norman because he's the main character, so we're kind of wanting him to get caught, but maybe not get caught too. It's an interesting thing to put an audience in position of, and that's, I think, one of the appeals of Columbo, along with, of course, the sort of class warfare, and it was a different way of doing a mystery, but we connect to the murderer in the first 20 minutes of that story. Then Columbo comes in, and we're sort of wondering if Columbo will see something that we've missed or the murderer missed, and we're kind of identifying a little bit with that guy we spent the first part of the story with. So there's a little of that here too, which is kind of marvelous. So maybe this kind of film will be discovered by younger people, courtesy of your program, Mark.
We'll see.
You get those Patreon people or whatever it is.
Let's see.
Pony up some cash. It's $4. It cost me $4 to watch this on YouTube. So
I think
you should call YouTube and say, I want $1 for every ticket sold now.
Yeah, there we go.
Got to go to Mubi. I think I watched this on Mubi or Tubi or one of those.
Tubi.
Oh,
I
really?
watched Tubi. Yeah,
I just looked it up, and the first thing that came up was YouTube. Maybe I should have looked harder. I didn't mind paying the $3.99.
Yeah, but you get no ads for them. We got ads at inappropriate times.
It looked great print. It looked fantastic.
But here's the thing, Mark. If I hadn't watched the Tubi version, I would never have known that Anthony Anderson is hosting a new show on Tubi where celebrity relatives perform in like a talent competition.
Yes! Oh,
you have to guess who they're related to.
Oh, no.
I saw that ad during the course of the Third Alibi. I saw that ad 5 times.
Hey, at least you saw that ad. The ad I had was the freaking centaur woman with the native body spray, which is native body spray, and she's a centaur woman.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that a couple of times. They run that one on Peacock too, for God's sake. What's that all about?
It was, yeah.
See, they're aiming at the Gen Z audience that needs body spray or something.
I'm scared. I have no idea what that is. I'm not going to look it up.
Now, gentlemen, did you catch the Dudley Moore cameo in the movie?
Oh,
yes, Dudley Moore is seen in the Broadway rehearsal, and of course, that's Cleo Lane before she had the kind of crazy fright wig singing the
Wait,
song.
Was Dudley on the couch?
Yeah, I think it was on the couch, or and also that was Cleo Lane, the famous jazz singer, who was singing the one song that we saw that Norman had written for his show. That seemed, it was a pretty fetching number called Here and There.
Yeah, it was a nice, like, kind of musical interlude. It almost seemed like they were padding for time. Like, okay, we don't quite have an hour,
but at least gave him credibility. Like, oh, I guess he's a decent composer because he seems not capable of anything else particularly.
Yeah, it also set up his, that part of his alibi, because as he's leaving, he's talking to his stage manager, like, don't try and contact me until after 9:30. But yeah, I love that the setup for the movie, it's I Know What You Did Last Summer. Norman and Peggy are driving. He's driving her home
Yes.
after this party at his house with his wife, and he's like, "Oh, I gotta drive her back home." They run over someone in the middle of the road, and he keeps driving, and she's like, "You gotta stop! You gotta stop!" He's like, "No, no one saw anything. It'll be okay." They get back to his place. 3 hours later, this great transition. You see the clock. It's 12:30 in the morning, and then it dissolves into the clock at
Right.
Helen's bedside table. It's 3:30 in the morning when he's coming home. And so you think, okay, this is going to be a movie about them coming up with an alibi for this person they, the hit and run or something. But no, it's not about that at all. Until the very end, as was mentioned, that kind of not exactly a cliffhanger, but the guy comes back. He's not wearing a Gordon's fisherman outfit, but he is there to cause some trouble. It's a brilliant piece, and I just love that 2 times in this movie you get outbursts of "shut up," people telling each other to shut up, and especially when Norman yells that to, my gosh, what is her name? Peggy. I want to say Patty. In the car, because she's hysterical after this hit and run. He yells "shut up," and I swear he lost his British accent for that.
Yeah.
Beat. He's like, "How can you do that? We've got to go back. Shut up!"
Yeah.
We're not going back. And then at another point, I raised my eyebrows. I had a Brad Dourif moment straight up, because at the end when Helen is confronting Norman, I think it's the moment that leads to her death. He says, "Bitch!" I'm like,
yeah.
Wow, 1961.
But she also told him to shut up too when he came and wanted the divorce. So she threw that word around too, which was I couldn't believe "bitch" made it into a 1961 film like that. That was a shocker.
I could not. I had to keep reminding myself this took place in London or in England, because the accents were so posh that I kept thinking they're like the mid-Atlantic accents they don't hear anymore. They're like George Plimpton, Gore Vidal, like that was that kind of accent. But yeah, especially when they said, "Oh, we should go to America," I'm like, "Oh, that's right." And the whole like. It wasn't exactly, you referred to it as Broadway, and that's how I think of it too, Jeff, but it was like the English equivalent of whatever they have.
Right. I misspoke
right?
there. I didn't mean Broadway. I mean like probably the West End or some sort of
I think it was
some sort of musical show. It might have been even a variety show. They were popular still in those days.
But even in that scene where we see him at the theater and there's that performance, that musical number, you think Broadway. This feels like every behind the scenes, making of a Broadway show movie you've seen. Yeah.
Well, I was happy they gave Cleo Lane a full song, and it was even what I loved about that too, though, is watching it just the little bits and pieces of his play. His real life was working its way into the play musical, whether he was aware of it or not, because she starts singing that song, and I'm like, wow, this is kind of musical-ish in that the song is kind of reflecting the relationship he has currently with Helen. I loved that bit, the stage part. I did have to remind myself too that it was British, because it was like, I was so into the movie, I don't think I cared. In all honesty, it was only until they get into some of the references, especially when they get into the officer who I just loved the art detective guy. He was so great. But all these characters are so much fun. But really the core of the performance, I mean, as far as, we said Lawrence Payne does well, I got to come back to Patricia Dainton, because wow, her Helen, watching her character when we're first introduced to her, she is like almost carryover from the 50s type of housewife of sorts, to where it's just everything's kind of Barbara Billingsley-ish, in a way, with her husband. And then she finds out that he wants a divorce, and then you just see her turn. And I loved it. You just see her expression. She goes from like surprised to hurt, and then all of a sudden she just gets this look like, fuck no, I'm not going to give you a divorce, basically. And then she goes, confronts Peggy, who, yeah, we're talking 1961, lights up a cigarette while she's pregnant. But hey, that's neither here or there. But she goes and confronts Peggy. But what I loved about Helen is how her character turned on the dime was because she's loving housewife. He goes, well, no, everything's boring. It should just get a divorce. You go, and then she came up, well, no, I'm not going to. And then he kept coming up with an excuse. And he's like, oh yeah, well, Peggy's pregnant. And I loved her retort. She goes, are you sure it's yours?
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, what's Norman's problem? Because clearly this woman has some real chutzpah and some attitude and some spark to her, and is no dumb cookie. So why are they having a bad marriage? Plus, she's a knockout. I mean, that actress holds the camera so well, and they dressed her well. She's got this beautiful hair that is interesting too, because it's all contained in the back, so they could loosen if they want. But in the meantime, it's sort of up and has that sort of formality to it, which is very teasing in its way. But I love those kind of actresses too, who sort of become sort of these supporting characters you fall in love with. Do you remember Joan Chandler, the woman who played the beleaguered girlfriend in Rope? I mean, those kind of actresses, I love those kind of characters and those kind of actresses who populated these kinds of movies. And Patricia Dainton is one of them, and she's really good. And I think she, to your point, Mark, in the end, she really handles the kind of the difficult material. She's telling her doctor when he tells her this terrible news, she's reacting to it maturely and telling him, we're not going to tell my husband, and here's why. So the wheels are spinning already, even when she's just been given this terrible heart diagnosis, which I love the doctors in those days too. Like, it's bad. Well, can you tell me how long I've got to live? No. I mean, it's like have another cigarette and just try to calm down. Did you also notice that the doctor looked a little bit too much like the husband? I thought there was a little bit of a casting mistake there, in the sense that doctor looked a lot like her husband. I thought maybe that was going to come in as a mistaken identity thing at one point. But anyway, but yeah, the Patricia Dainton character is terrific in this.
I agree. I have to pop out for just a second. I'll be right back, guys.
Okay, sure.
Pardon,
yeah.
sorry.
No, it's okay. Yeah, her character through the whole thing, like when the divorce announcement happens and how her character changes there, and then from there when she gets the news, and I love the irony. I love the irony of it, because she was going to go to Peggy, and you get this feel like she was going to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to give him the divorce because I'm dying anyway. So I'm going to give him the divorce. But then she hears the murder plot, and suddenly she's like, oh, hell no.
Yeah. She's taking her earrings off, getting ready for the fight, I love that. And she disappears for about 15 minutes of the movie too, because it's like she's off doing her thing. And gee, I wonder who shot well, are we going to give away the spoilers?
We'll give away a little bit. We'll wait till Ian gets back.
Okay.
But just with what they do with her character was impressive, and what she does with the character, because the irony that, in all honesty, because I knew very little of this film before, this is my first time watching it, I didn't expect the murder plot. I'm like, oh, okay, I see where this is going. She's learned that she's going to die. She's going to go tell Peggy, go ahead, something going. And then the guy they hit is going to come back. I kept thinking for a while, oh, they hit that guy. It's going to come back to, that's.
But then it doesn't, and you kind of forget about it. But then it does, and it's genius.
Yeah, and
it's so Columbo. It's so Columbo. There are literally 4 or 5 episodes of Columbo that almost ended in that kind of aha moment. Gotcha.
I'm back. Thank you.
Hello.
Sorry, no, my youngest was having a bad dream and was calling out. My wife was upstairs blow drying her hair, so she could not hear him. I could hear him through the floor, so I had to go.
Oh, that's a good dad.
That's a good dad.
Very thin walls.
Very much so. But no, Jeff, you mentioned before I ran upstairs, Rope. And I'm glad you brought that up because I was reminded of Rope in that last scene where the walls are closing in. Reminded very much of Jimmy Stewart and those two kids. I mean, they were supposed to be like,
Yeah.
almost like older teenagers in Rope.
Right.
That the climactic kind of interrogation, like, we've got you, we're putting the screws to you.
Yep.
Just it's a great moment of intensity, and you just see this guy kind of falling apart, even as he's grasping at anything. Like,
Yep.
oh, I've got the gun right here in my drawer. Wait, where'd it go? Oh, no. Yeah, it's beautiful. And
You
what
did
I
it.
love,
You did it. You overheard us, you know, and it was like, what? No.
exactly. And I love that Helen played back the scenario of their entire alibi that she had overheard through the door, complete with the glove left back at the theater and the problem of the concession stand. But it's also the theater of the mind kind of thing, because you realize that she murdered her sister-in-law.
Yeah.
I mean, you talked about a tough cookie, Mark. I mean, like, they didn't do, like, I think if this were to be done today, you'd see the usual suspects kind of moment where she'd show up at the door and you'd see the gunshot and all that stuff and the confrontation. But no, we're just left to imagine, sweet, kind of hot little Helen being
Is capable
driven to
of
that
it.
brink,
Yeah.
and like just the one to the temple. And I love that reveal too, because when Norman finds Peggy on the couch, she's just kind of slumped over with her head to the side, and he moves her, because you're like, oh, is she drunk? Is she asleep? Whatever. Moves her head, and you see the bullet, the little trickle of blood. Like, oh my God, this movie is for real. Like, Mark, you mentioned like the 1950s kind of housewife port. I mean, this is 61, so it essentially still is the 1950s. I mean, the 60s didn't become the 60s until like much later, in terms of like, Hollywood films and the rebellious new filmmakers. So there's a lot of that attitude that carried over, and I really liked that kind of aesthetic with the nastiness of this like seedy underbelly of the perfect family relationship.
Well, you talk about the her using Peggy's alibi. I didn't see that. I was like, because you're right. In this third act, when the cops are closing in on Norman, Norman's like realizing what Helen did, and he's like, oh yeah, well, you did this. You shot her. You had the gun. And she's like, well, no, I was at the theater. And they're like, oh, what movie? She's like, well, I don't remember. And then relayed that whole thing that Peggy was supposed to do after the recording. And I'm like, oh my God, this is brilliant. I'm sitting here going, Helen Martell is one of my favorite characters.
Well, and they do it without sacrificing the cops either. Like, a lot of times in these kind of movies, the cops would be portrayed in the Inspector Lestrade way as sort of doofuses who don't get it, and the celebrity sleuth has to come in and sort of show them the way. But here, the cops are good. They're smart. They're asking good questions. They're slowly and surely putting it all together, and kind of are sly and careful in their own way too, but in control of it, and certainly applying the screws to Norman. But she's ahead of them too, because she's covered her tracks very well, and it's all kind of in code for one and one person only, and that's her shit of a husband. And then, of course, right when you think, well, maybe they'll start asking her some questions too, and wondering what she's all doing, she conveniently exits stage right.
Yeah.
Why did Norman get to live? I know he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison, but when he calls her a bitch and she collapses, I'm like, I get it, I guess, but in my mind, her coming into her power, so to speak, and helping to like put this own twist on their plot, that for me, that superseded any of her heart conditions. Like, that should have been the thing. Like, yeah, I got over my nervous condition or whatever.
Yes, her heart grew 3 sizes that day.
Right. And I'm like, wait, what happened? Oh shit, it's the heart condition.
Darn.
No. But it's still, I love that. If that had been how it ended, I'm like, but then they bring back the old man on the road, who I love. He was the guy who was sitting in that trailer on top of the hill, constantly watching their house, not even really realizing, I think, what he didn't know that he was watching the people who had, run him over or anything. It's just, again, that kind of cosmic justice. It's really creepy.
Well, yeah, that was really great because I was wondering where they were going. I felt horrible that Helen passed. I was like, ah, man, I like great. They're gonna have this to where Norman gets away, and then they talk about the guy, and I'm like, oh, okay. Thinking, wait, that couldn't be the guy. Just as they were talking about the guy they brought down from the hill, I'm like, well, that can't be the guy they hit, can they? And then he walks in, and Norman, it's like this old guy is his last
Last hope.
that he didn't kill Peggy. And they just come in with that wonderful lesson. Well, it's like I told you, Lieutenant, before. Ever since I got hit by a car one night, I can't see a thing. And then boom, credits, and I'm like, yes.
They do that police squad thing where
Yeah.
they roll the credits over his still face. Oh, or not still, but just like he's not moving.
Yeah.
It's so
he's
funny.
standing still.
But it's funny. We tend to be very critical, or at least further generations with each passing decade tend to knock films as being provincial or corny or old-fashioned, and whatever awful descriptors they come up with of bygone eras. And yet you see a film like that ends with that freeze frame. Like that's the end. That's the last shot. Not of Norman, not even going go or being walked out. It's like, nope, it's the old guy going, freeze frame. Holy crap. And even again, I don't want to keep comparing it to Columbo, but like oftentimes Columbo would end on a great sort of freeze frame like that. Like when he reveals the gloves that prove to Ross Martin that he didn't touch the paintings, and he's just like, and it's freezing. And then the show's over. The episode's over. It's like, boom, get him, hit him right between the eyes. And before, you don't need this like, oh, they're being let out like, everybody after Tony is killed in West Side Story. I mean, I know that's a little bit different. I'm not knocking that as an ending, but they're kind of ballsy and daring in the way they end like that. And they ended not on the main character. They ended on this aha moment, which gotcha moment, which is, I think, for something as small as this film probably was when it was created in 61 is kind of a progressive and modern and shocking almost.
Well, Jeff, when we were talking about Columbo and how like Gen Z are discovering it on Peacock, and they're kind of, even if it's just for like the memes, or it's like, oh,
Yeah.
Let's watch this cheesy show from the 70s. Oh my God, it's actually really good.
Yeah, right.
Hope, because one of the things that I love about old detective shows and these kinds of movies we're talking about tonight is they're about adults, right? Yep. You watch stuff nowadays like, oh yeah, it's a movie about adults. Technically, yes, they're in their 20s and 30s, but they're all these developmentally arrested freaks. It's something where like complex plots and relatable emotions and stuff to us old fogies. So yeah, I'm wondering if that could potentially open the door to people watching black and white movies, heaven forbid. Because yeah, I look at something like this from 1961, and it should, we have talked about, I'm sure, our share of like, oh, this is dated and kind of cheesy. I can't see anything, and maybe it's just because I'm not 20 years old anymore, but I can imagine sitting someone younger down and saying, hey, watch this movie. Get over the fact that it's black and white. They're talking in English accents. Just pretend it's, fucking Bridgerton with the color settings changed or something like that. What do you think of this? And I could see people loving it because it's not corny. It's not predictable. I put this up against the complexity of, half the movies that are in multiplexes today.
Mm-hmm. Well, good, Mark. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I totally agree with you. And in fact, I think that the saddest part for me with most, I think, stories being told today is they are often being spoon-fed to people without letting them sort of discover stuff on their own. And you said it earlier, if they made this movie today, we would see Helen do the turn where she shows up and cons her sister into sitting down in this lull of thinking she's okay, and then boom, the gun comes out and she's shot. Where here it's off screen. It's left for us to sort of be fooled as well in some respects, along with her husband, and that's brilliant about it because what is not shown is all the better. I mean, in some respects, there's a little bit of that in a movie like Anatomy of a Fall, where we see the flashback of this big argument that took place, which shows exactly how bad the marriage was. But then when there's this critical part where there's some violence going on. We cut back to the jury just listening to it, and they have to sort of assume their own maker isn't going to, or the script isn't going to show us, which I loved. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right about even, again, bringing up Columbo. At first, it's like, oh my God, it's all so overlit. It looks like those, sort of cheap Universal movies and TV shows from the 70s that Airplane satirized so well, with everything being so bright, right? But they were cleverly written, and the characterizations between them, and the different levels of sort of chess that they were that Columbo was playing with the villains, and whether he was going to endear himself to them or sort of bother them or keep bringing stuff up. But I love the fact that audiences are discovering that, because so much of it is spoon-fed today. I mean, I couldn't watch Criminal Minds as much as I like procedurals ever, because every line of dialogue was exposition. There wasn't one thing ever really setting characters. Always like, oh, he's escalating his things now. How do you know that? Well, because now he's writing letters to people about it. And what does that mean? Well, it's called, really. But I mean, they had to do that to bring people along and spoon feed them with it, because maybe it's a little too complicated, even though they've seen how many different murder mysteries on TV and stuff like that. But I love a show like this. I love a show like Columbo, and some of the better things out there that don't show you everything, that assume that you're a smart person and that you'll catch it. I mean, one of the great things about Agatha Christie when you read her books, and a lot of people think that's almost too provincial today, but she played fair with the audience, and it was always there. Even Sherlock Holmes, who Agatha Christie did her characters sort of based on, because she was a big fan of Conan Doyle, said, I'm not brilliant. I just see things that are there that you are missing. And that's what I love about a movie like this, or some of these other things we've talked about. If you're paying attention, you'll get it, and you don't need it spoon-fed to you. And if you're surprised, you'll go, oh, shit, of course. How did I miss that? And that's kind of a joyous thing in a film, to be fooled like that. It's like a magician's trick almost. When you find out the magician's trick, you almost always go, oh, shit, how did I miss that? But that's the genius of it, is that it is explainable, but you still missed it.
But it's also, the movie takes its time. It's not exactly the obvious clue or working out like the mystery of it, but one of the great scenes, I think, in here is when Norman is just in his home office with those reel-to-reel tapes. He's like taking notes and stuff. And then he stops and he rewinds the tape, and he's fidgeting with the device. And like, what am I watching here? I don't quite understand what's going on. And that's because Norman is just having an idea, and that idea becomes it's like the seed, and then the spark, and then the full idea, and then the plot comes into his full view of what he can accomplish, and we get to see that. It's not this big dialogue scene of like, oh, I was sitting in my office and thinking about this reel-to-reel tape, and I discovered that I could use this to make a phony operator tape, and I'm going to go tell my mistress. No, that all happens, and you're like, oh shit, that's what that scene was all about. We find out like a scene or two later what he was actually up to. And it's brilliant.
Yep, we see him thinking, and the rest will reveal itself without rushing it.
Well, think about it too. When it's when they're accusing, the audience is never actually given the visual evidence that Helen killed Peggy. We all figure pretty much she killed Peggy. She doesn't admit it, but you can kind of see how she thinks on her feet at the end and gives the alibi that Peggy was supposed to the cops when we get that final climactic, ending. But I loved how we didn't get a flashback to her going into the house and shooting Peggy or whatnot, like her thinking and then flipping back to her and her giving her alibi, or her thinking of that moment and then coming back and then having the heart condition. It's not spoon-fed. So we're never actually given evidence that Helen did. We all figure she did it. We pretty much assume she did it, but you're never actually given that full evidence. It's what you both were saying. The filmmakers are putting it in the audience's lap a little bit to piece it together. They aren't going to, with an hour and 4 or 8 minutes that you have, they aren't going to show you every step along the way. But they give you enough to where you go, oh, and then especially when they say that they're going to bring in the guy from on the hill, that's the audience moment going, oh shit, is that the guy he hit? You're not quite sure, because he kind of looks like it. We only see him from a distance, but at the same time, it's kind of that bomb under the table, like Alfred Hitchcock would always say, showing the audience like, wait, oh, and you're hoping, and then it is, and then you're just like, yeah,
Well,
it's so
it's even
tiny.
well, it's even better than that, because when you think about the ending, it leaves you questioning things, much like,
Right.
to your point, Mark, what evidence do we have that, Helen actually shot Peggy? Not, it's not that far of a leap, but I'm more interested in what was Helen's end game, because
Right.
it doesn't matter if she got caught. Yes, you're right. She was thinking quickly on her feet with the cops talking about the alibi that she essentially stole from her sister-in-law. But ultimately, what would have happened if they had pegged her, no
Right.
pun intended, as having been the murderer? She's already dead.
Yeah,
It's
right.
it's almost like the circumstance of her actual death on screen is that she was startled when her husband, yelled at her, and that was her exit.
And he
But
raised
even
his
if she
hand at
had,
her too. He almost was.
Yeah.
oh,
like
that's
about
right,
to-
and that the cop caught it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But if she had, it's almost like that was perfect. Her main goal was to just make sure that she took out everybody that had wronged her. She literally killed her sister-in-law, and then she wanted to make sure that Norman's reputation was destroyed and that he went up the river, hell or high water. And there was a no lose scenario for her, because even if she got pegged with the murder of her sister-in-law, Norman was still, she'd figure out a way to ruin his life too.
It
Because
was
then he'd
also
have
pretty
a
daring.
dead mistress and a wife who'd gone to jail and also had a heart condition about, and it died.
It was also pretty daring thinking in context of the movie Fatal Attraction, which came out in 1987, and how controversial that was, even though they rewrote the ending for the audience. Ann Archer is the one who finally does in Glenn Close, not Michael Douglas. And she not only kills her rival, but also the rival's baby. And that is true here of Helen killing her stepsister. She's pregnant, and that's confirmed in the autopsy. So it's pretty daring to do that, even as a a matter of sort of revenge or whatever you want to call it in this film in 1961.
Well, that's
Well,
what
it's also,
go ahead, Ian.
forget it.
I was just going to say that's what I loved about this was that 1961, and this film is dark.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Ian.
It's dark, but also you think about, not Mark. Mark, I'm thinking about what you said, but you're thinking
That's
about
okay.
Norman's future.
Yeah.
Because as things fall apart with Helen, he's trying to, break away from her so he can be with Peggy. But she is revealed to be sort of the town bicycle. Helen kind of insinuates it, right? But just to kind of play with his mind. But then
Yes.
later we have the phone operator who's kind of gossiping with that lady. She's like,
which is a great scene.
I don't eavesdrop on people. It's just sometimes I have to check the line, which means listening in.
Yes. And
she's
she's been getting around, basically.
Right.
You're right.
Like
The
many
town
suitors,
bicycle.
so-
I haven't heard of that one before. That's a
Oh,
good way
really?
to-
Yeah. Oh, it's
Wow,
great.
where have I
Yeah.
been?
Anyway, but I think, but that, like, even if, let's just go to the perfect scenario where Norman had gotten his wish and he got to be with the woman that he actually loves, the adventurous free spirit, and oh my gosh, wait, the baby's not his. That would
Yeah.
be a very real
a good
possibility. All of this
See,
trouble
and
to find out that she was cheating and probably would continue to cheat.
and also underlines once again how smart Helen is and how he's underestimated her the entire time, because that's the first line she says when he says that she's pregnant. She goes, "Oh, do you know it's yours? Do you really?"
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Well,
She
and
knows. She probably knows her sister's a tramp too.
well, yeah, that's where she drops the line too, where it's her sister, and he's like, well, half sister, she's like, well, half sister, but still, it's her sister. She knows her better than he does, and she's
right.
like, and she even justified her comment of, look, it's not out of realm of possibility. I know her better than you do. And then we had the phone operator later going, well, she's never been alone or without company. That's what it was. Her evenings were without company very few times. And I'm like, oh man.
Before her family melded with mine, her last name was Schwinn.
But
Oh,
what was
no.
even wow. But her ruining Norman, some people might say, well, why didn't she maybe try to plot, or if she was already at death's door, why didn't she kill Norman? And it's because for him, she didn't want to just kill him. She wanted to ruin him. And his most important thing, even among both ladies, even above both ladies, was his work. He was obsessed. He loved his work, his reputation as a composer. He was hinging on it. That was his whole thing. He had to come up with some winning musical because it was his reputation on the line and his work. So Helen comes up with this way to not necessarily kill the man's life, but destroy the one thing he actually loved above everything else, which was his career. Because in Britain, especially, we're talking proper British, standards. Here's a guy who,
If she shoots him, she would kill him
Yeah.
once. If she punishes him, he dies every day.
Right. Exactly. Because it gets around. It's not proper. Suddenly
Even
it
in
gets
prison,
around.
while
Yeah.
he's waiting to be hung or electrocuted, he would be waiting days and weeks, never sleeping well, never eating, probably not being able to have a solid bathroom break because of it. And that's much more vicious and evil in this wonderful way than just shooting him dead in a matter of seconds.
Well, it's this classic like Betty and Veronica thing. I mean, you've got the kind of like the wholesome, all American, well, all British blonde one, and then you've got like the dark haired brunette who's like the racy, saucy one. But Norman could have saved himself a lot of trouble if he just said to Helen, hypothetically, what would you do if I was ever, like cheated on you or ran around with your sister?
Or said, darling, rather than talking meatloaf and compositions tonight, let's play a game. What if there was a lover of yours from the past that you wanted to kill? How would you do it?
Well, right.
You're very clever, very clever. Let's go make love.
Right, but if Helen had just like, even if she had just said, "Oh, darling, I take that gun you keep in the drawer and visit her house and shoot her and whatever bastard child she was bearing," that would have been. Norman would have had no troubles with a boring marriage ever again. Even if it was a boring marriage, he'd know that he was married to a very serious kind of out there person. I think that's all he wanted. He wanted a sense of adventure, a sense of danger in his life, which is what Peggy represented. I
also love the fact too, guys, that that by keeping Patricia Dayton off screen for those 10 or so minutes, when she comes back, we want to see her because we're curious about where she's been and what she's been doing, even though we probably know, but we're just curious about sort of how she comes back into the scene for both her husband as well as us in the audience. But I also love the fact that really up until she starts quoting the plan back to her husband, she still looks fairly sympathetic, or, she's sympathetic and on the bad end of the stick, getting the doctor news, finding out, the shock when she's hearing the murder plot being discussed, being told, viciously by her husband that he thinks she's boring. But when she is quoting the stuff back and Norman figures it out and sort of says, you heard it all, that kind of stuff, her face drops for only a few seconds in that whole film. And we see her eyes, which were before either kind of sad or pretty or upbeat or nice, just kind of dead, staring at him like, I've got you, checkmate. And it's a little terrifying, but it's genius and deliciously terrifying because it's like, holy crap, how did you miss that part of your wife? You thought she was dull.
I think, like if you're contemplating couples therapy, this is a good gateway, just like start with communication.
Norman, do you hear how evil and clever your wife is? And you think she's dull and only cares about meatloaf?
I loved the look. I just loved the look on Lawrence's face when you do see that bump just for a second when the cops turn their questions towards her. It's like just for a second she seemed a little bit surprised, and then she rattles off that exact alibi that Peggy was supposed to do, but she's looking at Norman the whole time she's reciting it.
Yeah.
And the look on Norman's face is like, oh shit. He literally puts it all together. He's like, damn it.
Well, on top of that, because he's probably wondering, seriously, how the hell do you know this? Like,
Yeah.
Did you bug Did you bug Peggy's house? Were you literally standing outside the door and we had no idea which was the truth? But in that moment, he's like, I don't know how. This is dark forces type of stuff, because there's no way you should be able to recite this plan. Ugh.
I have to say too, there's a special, probably collection of clips that they could do at some point where you see weak British men become weaker in films, which is always delightful when you see them sort of buckle and become like panicky and fraught and sweaty, and like Farley Granger in Rope, even, and some of those, though he wasn't British per se, but I love it when you see those characters just sort of shrivel even more. It's always funny.
And I
kind of saw that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I loved the humor they brought to the cops, because he does it. If this was the US, he'd immediately would just suspect husband right away. Like, boom. Like, I mean, they already put but he gives him the benefit. He gives Norman a little bit of the benefit of the doubt at first. When the young lieutenant comes in, he goes, well, isn't he a suspect? And he's like, he did see a dead body. We're used to it. Other civilians aren't. He's like, I got to see more evidence. And I liked that. I liked the fact that even though Norman did not help his case at all, the cop still was like, you know what? I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt for the moment. And then evidence poured in.
He was more measured.
Evidence poured in real quick. He's like, yeah, I think you're onto something.
Let's go visit him again, shall we?
Well, I mean, this is sort of a carryover from what we were talking about last week with Alibi from 29.
Yeah.
Talking about a character that we're introduced to that is kind of tough. I'm thinking of the Chick Williams character, the guy who turned out to be the gangster in that movie. Real tough guy, right? And thinks he's in control. And at the very end, he's buckling, begging for his life from this cop, the detective. In this movie, we meet Norman. He's like Mr. Socialite guy. He'll drive over someone and keep going. And, despite his mistress screaming at him and stuff, like, oh, this guy, he's a monster. He's a badass.
He's pretty
he's
cold.
in control of everything, right? But he's cold out of insecurity, right? Because almost everything we see, the dominoes continue to fall very slowly, and then all at once at the end of the film, when he's just a complete mess and losing control of everything. So not only, Mark, does this month have Alibi in the title of all these movies, but we are seeing these great kind of themes taking shape, and I think these last two films are a great example of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's fun watching them spin characters. I mean, because in all honesty, I hate to say it, and I'm sorry, pardon my get off my lawn, hey, they don't make them like they used to type of approach, but you don't see these type of character turns nearly as much in cinema nowadays as you have now, to where they're one way, but as they go along, you're like, oh wait, no, that person's the same way. Pretty much the person you're introduced to. I mean, I'm thinking of like Killers of the Flower Moon. Okay, the classic example. Leo's character is pretty much the same throughout. Was it De Niro? He's pretty much the same throughout.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just, the only thing you find out is that maybe they're worse than what you initially. I mean, they're bad, but now they're actually worse, rather than a change like with Helen or even with Norman, to where, hey, they're this strong character, and by the end, they're a blubbering mess, or vice versa. Oh, they're the damsel in the, oh, no, they're not. They're a half-sister killing, plotting, cold-hearted. Yeah, I'm going to get my revenge on you, killer. and I think it's missing, not all films. I'll say some of the modern films, but I just seeing these, like we said, in 1929 with Alibi, and this one in Third Alibi, we've got that trend still, and you see it in some other classic films, and I think it's more prominent there than here, to where you actually get more of a not, I don't know if you want to say drastic, but interesting character turns for your
Mark,
character.
this movie is 1/3 the length of Killers of the Flower Moon, and you get like 10 times more, actual plot and characterization and stuff that makes sense. But yeah, modern movies, I think, suffer from bloat, and to what Jeff was saying, the kind of like the lowest common denominator, like spoon feeding characterization. Yeah, I'm done with modern movies. I think I'm just going to stick to everything that came out before the advent of color. That's my stance. You heard it here first.
Ian, call me to talk about those movies on your show, or Mark on yours, because I probably saw them when they were out the first time. Or
Are you a vampire, Jeff?
I am.
He is a vampire.
Quiet. Well, I will tell you this one quick thing, and it's
Yeah.
an interesting question, topic you raising, and we sort of hit on it a few times here, and we've hit on it in past programs as well. But when I was growing up, of course, there was no cable, there was no internet. You had 3 channels basically. But what you did have is a lot of old movies that became content for those networks and afternoons and whatever else. So I was introduced in junior high to the Marx Brothers and W.C. Fields and Abbott and Costello and Alfred Hitchcock and Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald. I mean, people don't know any of those things today, and yet that was available. It's probably still available some places here, but I don't know anybody who watches Turner Classic Movies other than probably you two, and yet that's about the only place you can see a lot of this stuff anymore. Or when Mark says, hey, we're going to talk about the Third Alibi from 1961, and they miss so much, but it's a tragedy. I think that, to your point, Ian, if it's a black and white film, kids don't want to watch it. It's black and white. I mean, even if it's past, I was talking to somebody a couple months ago, and they called John Hughes an old-timey filmmaker, and it's like,
Oh dear Lord.
well, he's not, but I grant you that's 30 plus years ago now, so I guess I understand that. But I said, what is silent movie making like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd mean to you? And they went, who? They hadn't heard of those 3 people. I mean, when I sort of juggled, or whatever you want to call it, triggered her, or she was able to say, oh, Charlie Chaplin, right, the guy with the mustache and the bowler hat or whatever. I don't know if she bowler hat, but whatever. But that's just, there's not that appreciation for it anymore. But I'm glad you guys do. So that's wonderful to bring that to the audience, because I think we can sit and disagree about Oppenheimer, and everybody's talking about that movie, and that's current. But in some respects, it's more fun to go back to the old stuff and talk about. I wish I was in when you guys talked about Repulsion and some other great ones that I love from the bygone era, but young people don't have any interest in some of that.
Well, I think you can.
And I'm not knocking young people.
No,
I think there's just too much else distracting them that it's like, why would I care about a movie that's made in the 40s?
That's a
They
whole.
just don't seem to process that.
Well, that's a whole conversation and a whole show in and of itself. No, we've talked about it before, though, on how, as I call it, and I will stick to the term, that we've hit critical mass media, in that there is so much to watch that the generation that's grown up with so much at their fingertips, they have more of a choice of things that they can find, rather than necessarily being pushed out of your wheelhouse on purpose because you don't have many options. In Milwaukee, we had 3 channels, the ABC, NBC, and CBS. We had the PBS. And then if you wanted, there was channel 18 and 24, which were the independent channels.
Yeah.
And
that was my childhood too, because I watched Milwaukee stations too.
And channel,
and even PBS wasn't always, it wasn't
that's where I got my Doctor Who. That's where I got my Doctor Who, because they used to play all the episodes. That's where they got all the episodes. They would play for the entire week. They'd play a whole series, 2.5 hours, all the episodes for the 4th Doctor or whatever. But where I was going with this is channel 18 was an independent channel. They had to fill their time. So I know far more than I probably should about Ma and Pa Kettle and the Talking Mule, but also they had Schlock Theater or Shock Theater with I forgot the name of the host, but who show old horror films from the 50s,
Friday nights.
40s. Yeah.
I used to watch that too. The Brain That Wouldn't Die.
Yeah, he'd play those, and then but the reason I watched those is because you only had like news or sports on the other channels, and as a kid, I wasn't really into a lot of those. So you wanted to watch something. So okay, I'll watch this. Yeah.
And they were movies that you weren't ever going to see because they weren't really going to be in the theaters ever again, and there weren't tapes and some of those kind of things. But so if you didn't watch it then, you were never going to see it. So it was kind of a little bit of I don't want to say must see TV, but you must see it at that moment. Otherwise, you weren't going to be able to see it.
So, so that's why this whole year is probably going to be older films. And I don't know what listening base, if we're going to get a lot of listeners or not this year, but most of them are going to be older films, not all of them. But.
I was going to say, there's an opportunity here to, I know you've got stuff mapped out, but I mean, trying to find a modern or even a modern-ish analog to some of these movies to kind of illustrate some of these points that we're talking about. That might be kind of a fun idea. But if not, I mean, I'm happy to go on this journey because, like I mentioned, there's just not, everything is content now. Even movies are content and everything's interconnected and IP driven. It's nice to be able to go back to something that I have no expectation of and see storytelling techniques and plot lines where I think, oh, I've seen everything. Wait, I've never seen this, or I've never seen it presented this way. What the hell are people doing nowadays? They need to go back and do their homework and come up with ways to wow the audience, because this whole notion of like, oh, everything's been done. Yes, but sometimes it's only been done once in a movie that no one has heard of for 50 years. And if you insert this ingredient into your shitty blockbuster, you can make something memorable.
Well said.
Well said. Well said. And I think that's where we'll leave it for this evening. Hope people enjoyed our conversation of the Third Alibi. And we didn't spoil all of it. You still should experience it because, this film, I just went through and looked for films that had the word alibi in them, and looked at the synopsis a little to see if they'd be interested. And I'm so glad I picked this because this would have never been on my normal radar because it's such a small kind of out of the way film. And yet I'm glad I did because this is a solid film, even for modern standards. There's nothing really in this film that truly dates it to where you're going, oh, this is, if you colorize this, people wouldn't probably know. You could colorize this, not that I would want to, but you could, Turner back in the day was doing that with everything. And also to note before we close things out, this is Patricia Danton's last film.
Oh, wow.
She lived, but this was her last film as an actress.
I was going to say, did she actually die during that last?
No,
she probably got married and had a real life or something. A lot of young actresses did that in those days.
She had another movie the same year called Ticket to Paradise, but Ticket to Paradise and The Third Alibi were the last films she's credited with. And then she lived till 2023.
What?
So, yeah. So,
wow.
But she was also staged, so she may have went to the stage.
Oh, she might have done theater,
too, and done theater. But yeah, she. I thought that was interesting. This was one of her last films because she's so good in it. She's really
and that's the magic of doing these kinds of shows and watching these kinds of movies is, I'm with you guys. I've never seen or heard of her before. Although I kept having this nagging feeling that I had seen her before, but I think I just am thinking of someone who kind of has that look. But I want to go back and watch whatever movies she had been in
likewise
up to this, because she is a presence. You don't hear that word much anymore, but she is. You cannot not be interested in whatever she's doing in this 60 minutes.
Agreed. Well, thank you, folks. We've gone a little over 60 minutes tonight. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for listening. Next week, we have a more modern film we'll be talking about from 2006, Lies and Alibis, which is, I believe, a comedy. It was one that, yeah, so that'll be interesting to see. It's a jump from what we've kind of been watching. And just to let you know, even it's not called Alphabet Soup next month. Next month, folks, yeah, you can subscribe to our podcast here so you can catch Ms. March, where we will be looking at 4 films. We're looking at M 1951, M 1931, a film called I from 2015 from from India, and we'll be looking at Z, which is a French political thriller. So we've got Ms. March coming up next month. But now what we have is our license to shill. So this is where I give my wonderful crew members their chance to tell you stuff about what they're doing when they're not here being wonderful crew members on my show. So Jeff, go ahead. The license to shill is yours.
I have a movie blog called theestablishingshot.org. You can see it written under my name there. I write 2 articles about the industry for Pipeline Artist Magazine each month. I have Jeff York Chicago TikTok, which are 1-minute movie reviews with illustrations that I do as impressions of the movie as well. And I'm a member of the Chicago Indie Critics and love Ian, even if we disagree on 1 or 2 movies in a year. And you too, Mark, of course.
Oh, wow. Thank you. And Ian, the license to shill is yours, sir.
I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com. But mostly I'm on YouTube. If you look up Kicking the Seat on YouTube, you'll find me there. I do reviews and roundtables and interviews and all sorts of fun stuff. So like, subscribe, and hop on board. I'm also here on Monday nights. It's weird because it's President's Day. I actually have the day off of work, but it still feels like the weekend. So I don't even know what day it is. You're lucky I showed here, bud. I was like, wait.
This is way past your bedtime.
That's true. That's also
it's a
why
school
I'm
night.
rambling.
Tomorrow is school.
Tomorrow my wife has jury duty, so and my son has a dental appointment in the afternoon. I'm going to be like full on Michael Keaton, Mr. Mom mode. It's going to be amazing.
Guess what I'm doing tomorrow?
Probably going to see something awesome.
Dune 2.
Oh, you get this. Oh, that's already coming up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Already.
So
I've got a doctor's appointment in the morning and a couple other things, but then I thought, well, I'm taking the personal day, so because I look at that agency as my real job. But I'm going to go see Dune 2.
Make sure you get your
Dune 2.
Make sure you get your popcorn container.
Yeah, that's right. And it's shaped like the worm or whatever the hell it is.
Ian's got it. Is
that actually it?
Ian, don't show it. We're going to get banned from YouTube.
I want it to be shaped like Zendaya. No, is that not possible?
We're going to get it. We're going to get banned.
Like remember the shampoo bottles that used to be shaped like?
Yeah.
I do remember that.
Penelope Pitstop and Josie and the Pussycats. Do you remember
this is where we're going to end this. It's getting spicy.
Sorry. I'm still in the Patricia Dayton mode. Huh?
You're still in the
and fetching young lady.
And folks, if you're interested at all in what I do after you check out their wonderful work, specialmarkproductions.com for all your movie man needs. And now we'll have a blog post each week or month, depending on how soon I can bring it up. You can catch all the content because I've been told I create a lot of content. Yeah, I know. Where you can catch up each week on what was released in the previous week. If you go to specialmarkproductions.com/in case you missed it is what the blog is called. And it'll just have links to what I've posted on Patreon, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, whatever. Will be live written reviews. Links will be there. So you can check up for all the stuff we did previously in case you haven't subscribed, which shame on if you haven't, because we got wonderful lineup. I mean, Ms. March alone is going to be a wild one, especially when we get to I.
I got to start watching it now.
It's a 3-hour movie. Yeah. But
I will join you for M&Z.
Well, we appreciate that quite a bit, Jeff. Thank you, Ian, as always. And thank you to my live watchers as well. We're live Monday nights, 9:30 p.m. Central Time, folks. So thank you so much. And until next time, we'll just say good night, everyone.